Zach Lowe questions just how good Josh Giddey could be for the Chicago Bulls, while another article picks Josh Giddey and Buzelis to be the Bulls' best players in 3 years. We're going to talk about all that plus more on today's Chicago Bulls Central.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host here, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today. So, Zach Lowe, who's been somebody who has been very, I think fairly critical over the Chicago Bulls offseason as far as the Bulls, not getting necessarily biting on assets at the right time and some of the returns in cases like that. But he talked about Josh Giddy specifically and how Josh Giddy is going to play and be for the Chicago Bulls. Saying that he does think that Josh Giddy will put up big numbers for the Chicago Bulls and that he's going to be the engine of the Chicago Bulls offense, which is something that I think a lot of Bulls pundits and things have been saying. And he said that, running a competent offense is the most difficult job in the NBA, but that looking at some of Josh Giddy's weaknesses, he wondered what his ceiling with the Chicago Bulls really is. And that is a fair question. He predicted Josh Giddy to be the 11th best creator in the NBA next season. And then, question if Josh Giddy could be a player that the Chicago Bulls can realistically build around. And I think all that's fair, right? Like, that is the question that the Bulls themselves are asking when it comes to Josh Giddy is that, hey, I've said this before too, like, if you can get back to those numbers and hopefully be even better than the numbers in 2022-23, where you averaged almost 17, 8, and 7, right? When you average that, okay, that's fine. Those are good averages. Those are good numbers. But how does that now contribute to winning for the Chicago Bulls going forward into next season, as well as the fit, right? How does he fit next to the players that are also going to be part of the future outside of just Coby White, but overall there? And so there are really good questions that are asked there about Josh Giddy and how he can play. And now there also was an article that predicted Josh Giddy and Buzelis to be the best players on the Chicago Bulls in a 3-year in the next 3 years. And we'll break that down a little bit here in a second. But what does Josh Giddy need? And what does he need to add to his game to be able to be a player that not only the Chicago Bulls can build with, that they can build at least an offense around? Because we already know defensively Josh Giddy leaves a lot to be desired, but it's not like he's the only player in the NBA that, is questionable defensively, but, can be really good offensively. I think it comes down to a couple of things for Josh Giddy. Number one, when it comes down to it, is his shooting. Now, Josh Giddy's shooting is something that a lot of Bulls fans, especially ones that have been against the move, and some of the Lonzo Ball stands that still hold out hope that a player that's been out of basketball for 3 years is going to all of a sudden come back and be the starting point guard with the minutes restriction and everything. Stop smoking dope. But with that said, a lot of people who think that, and but that is a serious question when it comes to Josh Giddy, is how much of his shooting is going to be something that could be rounded out. How consistent can he be from shooting? And when you look at it, Josh Giddy has improved as a three-point shooter every year that he's been in the league. 33.3%, 33.7% last season on 3 attempts per game is right? It's not anything to write home about, but it does give a nice basis there. Now, Josh Giddy has to be more of a threat when it comes to shooting the ball, especially open shots when teams try to sag off him. A lot of of the detractors go to how Josh Giddy's career and season ended last year with the OKC Thunder, right? As far as in that series against Dallas, where they really put pressure on him and he was basically unplayable. But people overlook the fact of the Pelicans tried to do the exact same game plan to Josh Giddy, and he actually shot the ball 50% from 3, taking 4.5 per game because they tried to pressure the defense and sag off of him and force him to become a three-point shooter. And he became a better three-point shooter every game in that series, starting off going 0 for 2 in the first of game 1 of that series. Then he went 1 for 3 in the second game, then 4 for 7, and then 4 for 6 over those last 2 games, averaging 12.5 points per game, close to his season average, only taking 9.5 shots per game, again, because he was kind of phased out of the offense at that point. But so Josh Giddy has shown that there's something there that he's going to try to become a better three-point shooter. And a big player that you can compare that to is you look at Jason Kidd. Jason Kidd was a all-star multiple times while he was shooting 33% from three-point range. He eventually became a solid three-point shooter, became an above-average three-point shooter, which, of course, helped him as his career went along. So you can't take away the fact that Josh Giddey is 21 years old. He's not done growing and developing. And you don't need Josh Giddey to become Steph Curry out there. You need him to be a solid three-point shooter to where he can make defenses pay when they try to sag off of him and become a better off-ball player, right? So we'll get into the off-ball part of it. If you look at Josh Giddey, if he can become around a 36% three-point shooter, taking about 5 attempts per game, let's say between 5 and 7 attempts per game, that is where his three-point shooting is no longer something that teams just can look at and say, hey, we're not worried about Josh Giddey as a three-point shooter. It still doesn't make him a great three-point shooter, and that's why I want to key in on that. He doesn't have to become a great three-point shooting, especially if you have better three-point shooting around him on the team, which is something you should want anyway if your Josh Giddey is going to be your starting point guard. Not saying that we have that yet, but that is something that you should want around Josh Giddey as things go forward. That's up to the Chicago Bulls to kind of find a way to put that around him. But becoming about a 35 to 36% three-point shooter would put him, like I said, a decent three-point shooter in the league. Not a great three-point shooter, but not a terrible three-point shooter. It would actually put him around the same areas like a Donovan Mitchell, right? Those type of players, Austin Reeves, those type of players. He needs to be around that area. If he can get to that, I think that's solid enough with his ability to drive, with his ability to get to the lane, with his ability to finish in mid-range and at the rim. If he can do those things, I think that makes it solid enough. So that's one area that Josh Giddey's game would have to drastically improve for him to show that he can be this guy that the Bulls can build, again, at least their offense around. The next thing, how will Josh Giddey and Coby White adapt to being off the ball? We know that the expectation right now is that Coby's going to have to do more off-ball work. Coby has not been a great catch-and-shoot player over the course of his NBA career. He's better on pull-ups. But I don't see the Bulls completely taking the ball out of Coby's hands either. At least, knock on wood, I hope that they don't, right? And so because of that, Josh Giddey's going to also have to learn and play without the ball as well. That is the place where I don't necessarily have the biggest faith in Josh Giddey. So there's some questions there, right? I think when you look at definitely with Coby White, his usage rate is probably going to be higher than Josh Giddey. That's something that, well, we'll see, right? That's something that, you took the ball out of his hands with OKC because you had a player like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander there who definitely deserved the ball more again, but Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, was even kind of worse off ball than Coby White in some areas. So, the thing is, you have these two guys now. How can they adapt to each other? That's the question there that you have to have as well. And if that's something that they can adapt to as far as playing with each other, that, of course, helps that. And, maybe the Bulls do have to eventually make a decision, but Josh Giddey has to grow as a player with being off the ball a little bit. I still think he's gonna have a big share of the ball in his hands. His usage rate is still going to be high because usage rate also takes into fact how many of your possessions end in you getting an assist. That's something I expect to happen here a lot with Josh Giddey. And then, of course, the defense. The defensive aspect of Josh Giddey. When you look at how Josh Giddey has grown and changed as a defender, he's grown as far as guarding point guards in the mid-range and near the he's actually one of the best shot blocking guards in the paint in the league, right? That's just what it's been for Josh Giddey. Now, he's going to have to be much better with guarding off ball and on ball. And that's something that he's shown a little bit of ability to adapt to. Not great. I'm not going to blow smoke here and try to make it seem like as a three-point shooter, Josh Giddey, especially as an open three-point shooter, which could be created, especially when Coby's handling the ball a lot more, he's grown really well in that. As a defender, it's been minor growth there from Josh Giddey and, as an on-ball defender. Now, the thing is, how much of that are the Bulls hopeful is going to change? I've said it before. If Josh Giddey can turn into an average defender or an average three-point shooter, and God forbid he becomes both of those, right? I'll say even maybe a slightly below average defender and maybe an average three-point shooter. If he can grow into either one of those two things, that's going to help Josh Giddey exponentially, as well as getting to the free throw line. That is another thing that we're going to be missing with DeMar DeRozan gone, is that Josh Giddey doesn't get to the free throw line a lot, and even when he does, just admittedly, he's not a great free throw shooter at all. I'll even go on to say that, that's something that I'm maybe even a little bit more concerned about than teams trying to leave him open from three, is if, hey, are you going to start imploring Hack a Giddey? Because that may be a pause. That may have just been a pause. But if you do try to implore that, Even though last year he was an 80% free throw shooter, that was only taking 1.5 per games. Again, he doesn't get there, but the prior 2 years, 73%. He's a 75% free throw shooter over the course of his career. You want him to be better in those areas. And if he can't be, that could be something that teams look to implore as you go on. But overall, like when you look at Josh Giddey as a defender, right? The rim defense, 71st percentile as far as rim defense. He's actually become a solid rim defender, again, when he's guarding guards. Rim frequency, again, when an opponent has shot attempts at the rim on Josh Giddey, they only hit it at 42.9%. That's not a great percentage. So, for the opponent. So he's almost in the 80th percentile as far as guarding at the rim. He's become a pretty good player in that. The versatility grade for him as well has become better over the course of years, which is, again, he's between a scale of 1 to 100. He actually grades as an 80 as far as versatile positions that he can guard because he's guarded point guards, shooting guards, and small forwards. And I know a lot of Bulls fans thinks he's going to guard small forwards. We'll see what happens there, right? So he's become somebody who has increased in certain areas, and you can't deny that, right? Defensively, he's gotten better. The question is how much better can he continue to grow defensively for him to be the player that, again, the Bulls can really start looking at a player that they're not just building with, that they're building around in some cases, specifically offensively. So I think if those things come together for Josh Giddey, you're looking at a player that can be one of the better point guards in the league. By the way that he runs the offense, we've already talked about it. He's in the 90th percentile as far as open shots generated for his teammates when he's on the court. That 91st percentile. Like he does that pretty damn well. And so he has that skill that you can absolutely look at, as well as how he finishes around the rim is pretty solid for him. If you pair those two things, you can add in some 3-point shooting and things like that when it comes down to it. You're having something that you can start looking at building around and how you supplement that with some of your other players, but that's still up to Josh Giddey to be that. I think another thing that people overlook when it comes down to it as well is that 2 out of Josh Giddey's 3 seasons so far, he's a plus. He has a positive box plus minus when he's on the court. So again, he is impacting the way that you win. I don't know if his play can say that he's impacting winning just by himself, but the style of play that he helps develop, he's impacting winning. Now, the question is how he's going to do that with the Bulls, how he's going to fit going forward, and we'll see what that ends up bringing about for the Chicago Bulls. But you guys can let me know what you guys think on that down below. Like I said, Zach Lowe is a guy that I won't say hold on to every word that he says, but his criticisms over the Bulls have been ones that a lot of Bulls fans have shared. Now, I do think in prior years he's had some criticisms that have seemed kind of targeted with the Bulls. I don't know what that's about, but it is what it is there. Now, with that said, I also said that we were going to talk about an article in which it was written about predicting the best players on each NBA teams in the next 3 years. Josh Giddey was picked there, and we can see why if he starts developing some of the ways that we picked there. But also, Modest Buzelis was a player that was picked there as well, and he was the other contender for that, whereas they had Josh Giddey. And the Josh Giddey aspect of it is pretty damn clear, right? If Josh Giddey gets back to more so of what he was in 2022-23, I know we keep going back to that, but if he gets back to that, if you look at over his first two seasons before the OKC Thunder kind of changed and phased him out, 15 points per game, basically 8 rebounds per game, and 6.3 assists per game over his first 2 seasons in the NBA. He's always been in the top 10 of triple-doubles in the NBA as well. That's something that you can look at and absolutely see, hey, if this guy can turn into a better 3-point shooter, if this guy can start focusing more on defense and using his length to be a more positive defender, those things you can absolutely see him being a player that can build around. So, it's something with that. Like, people have compared him to, of course, Ben Simmons, who's a countryman of his, and, we'll see. I think that Josh Giddey has a much more, has shown much more willingness to take the 3-point shot than what Ben Simmons is. And he also, isn't afraid to play basketball. But that's a story for another day. So the story for Josh Giddey, I think we've kind of made that if Josh Giddey's able to do those things that we mentioned in the last segment, he can absolutely become probably the best Bull in 3 years. Again, Coby needs put more respect on Coby White's name, y'all. Like, one thing that I'll say with this, I get it. You went to Josh Giddey, you went to Modest Buzelis. Because Coby White, we don't even know if he's going to have a contract in 3 years with the Chicago Bulls. But let's put more respect on Coby White's name. Like, I'm just, between the trade talk, between the kind of overlooking him now for Josh Giddy and other players, like, put some fucking respect on Coby's name. I get it. Yes, what he did last season was one season so far. But let's not act like Coby White hasn't been a player that has put in work every single offseason. Let's not act like Coby White isn't a player that's adapted to every situation and every role that the Bulls have changed for him every season of his career. Let's put some goddamn respect on Coby's name. I'm telling y'all, writers, now, put some respect on Coby's name. Listen, I guess this is what people like me are for, that more so cover the Bulls more intimately, but at the same time, Andy Bailey, who wrote this article, put more respect on Coby White's name. Thank you. Now, with that said, the case for Modest Buzelis, right? And Modest Buzelis, much like Josh Giddy, not comparing them as players, but much like Josh Giddy, is a player that you look at and you say, if he, depending on how he fixes some of his flaws, you can absolutely see that extremely high ceiling that he came into the draft with. And that's what it comes down to with Modest Buzelis. Could he be the Bulls' best player in 3 years? I do think there's a chance of that. And that will come down to a few things. We know energy, activity, the mindset, the creation around the rim, the tough finishes. Those are things you don't have to worry with Modest Buzelis. He's going to give the effort. But it's more of the refined skills. How Modest Buzelis refines his skills over his first 3 years in the NBA is going to be hugely telling to what level and caliber of player that he can be going forward into his career, right? Is he going to be a player that puts up points, but he does so more in transition, things like that, but being a bad defender? Is he going to be a player that can't and has not developed a consistent shot? Is he going to be that? Those are questions that you have to legitimately ask with Modest Buzelis. And much like in my pre-draft analysis of Modest Buzelis before I knew he was going to be a Bull, it comes down to how good is Modest Buzelis if that shot never works out, never rounds out for him. That's the question that you have to ask for himself. And he's shown the finishing, all the things that I just listed. He's shown things that absolutely can be NBA skills, but those are NBA skills that are kind of more indicative of a role player, a high-level role player, an energy guy, more so than a player that's your best player on your team. So for Modest to really ascend to a player that you can see being the best player on a winning team, he has to be a more consistent shooter. The 32% shooting from the field is not something that he can be having and be one of the better players on a winning team. You just can't do that. Now, do I think that Modest Buzelis is going to put in the work? Absolutely. Do I think he's already probably talked with Peter Patton, and Peter Patton probably can't wait because the mechanics of his shot are pretty damn good. He needs to get off that release a little bit quicker, but the mechanics of that shot there, he was a solid three-point shooter in college. That's part of the reason why he was such a highly recruited player out of college. So if he becomes out of high school, but if he becomes a player that, again, if he can become a consistent three-point threat, shooting it at a 36 to 38% from three-point range, with his ability to drive, with his dribble ability, those type of things, absolutely. And while he's a solid passer, especially in transition, he has to become a better half-court passer. Modest Buzelis has the upside of being potentially a point forward type player, but you got to become a better and smarter passer over that time, and I think that Modest Buzelis is going to put in that work. If you're betting on a player to be able to ascend to that level, Modest Buzelis is not a bad pick there because of the way that he works, because of the mentality, because you have no doubts in talking to this guy that he wants to be the best player on any team, any room that he steps in. He wants to be that. But he said a lot of those same things about Victor Oladipo. If you go back and actually look at the draft of Victor Oladipo, there's a lot of comparisons with the mentality, and we've just seen, and Oladipo had big health concerns there as well. But so you got to look at those things. But Buzelis is the type of player, and I think that, sometimes, we doubt guys, and that's rightfully so until we see it, right? I'm a show me guy as well. Until I see it, it's really hard to kind of quantify things at times. But predicting Modest Buzelis to be the Bulls' best player in 3 years, as of what we have on this roster right now, is not a bad pick. The question is just how much are the Bulls going to realistically develop him, and how much of that high-level potential that he has here is he going to be able to develop? And as a defender, Modest Buzelis has all the makings of a really good positional defender. He actually is a really active defender as well. That's why it's kind of even more concerning for me that he's not a positive defender yet, because it's not like he falls asleep out there. He's active. And you got to also look at it. He went from playing high schoolers to grown men, going into the G League Ignite. So how he grows as a defender and as a shooter are going to be the two things that tell me, can Modest Buzelis be the best player on a winning team? Not a championship team, but on a winning team. we'll see what happens when it comes down to that. But let me know what you guys think on that as well down below. Now, one last topic before we go. I know we talked a little bit about that DeMar DeRozan interview with on Podcast P yesterday, and we kind of focused it more around his comments on leaving the Bulls and his relationship with Zach LaVine. Well, there was more in that interview as well, as far as him talking about more of his time here, of course, with Chicago, but also calling Alex Caruso one of his top 3 favorite teammates of all time. And we already know that number 1 is probably Kyle Lowry, right? Like, we have no doubts there. But, just seeing again him talking about that relationship with Alex Caruso, if you watch this interview, you almost get teared up with the fact that, DeMar DeRozan really did have a good relationship with so many of these players, and how he was invested in the young guys and wanting to see them be a part of what makes them winning players, right? But one thing that also stood out in this is him talking about other teams that were reportedly real options for him in free agency, saying this, thinking about Philly. Philly was definitely an option. The Lakers were an option. The Clippers were an option. And the Heat were an option. Those teams were a real, personal, legitimate option that I was considering. Now, we did hear over the offseason that the Philadelphia 76ers were high on DeMar DeRozan, so that's not too surprising. The Lakers, the Clippers, the the Clippers losing Paul George, that all makes some sense as well. But the question that I want to take this and throw this to is that if all these teams were interested in DeMar DeRozan, this kind of highlights, again, why the Bulls being slower to understand that they needed to move off this core hurt them more. If those teams were interested in him in free agency, they would have been interested for him at the trade deadline, where you could have got more assets back. And again, I'm not trying to stay on this thing and just shit on the front office all offseason, but it gets down to the point again. This front office has to learn from these mistakes. This is why I've talked about, like, the front office moving on from Torrey Craig near the trade deadline if a team's interested or whatever else. You have to learn from this. You have to learn from this. And it seems like DeMar DeRozan, the more that you hear from this interview, is that he probably came to the realization that the time with the Bulls here was ending, maybe even towards the end of the season. Again, the Bulls were always the last to realize the direction that things were going. You got to be better than that, AK. You got to be better than that, Eversley. You got to be better than that, Billy Donovan. Why am I throwing Billy Donovan in there? Because I just wanted to throw a shot at Billy Donovan. He doesn't necessarily determine player personnel, but you get a shot there as well. So yeah, it just goes back to the Bulls have to be better in this next phase at understanding the ebbs and flows. And let's hope that they can do that. But again, shout outs to DeMar DeRozan for just being the player and the class act that he was here with Chicago, because we appreciate it, because we haven't had a whole lot of free agents to come in and have the impact that DeMar DeRozan did. But that's my time for today, guys. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bull Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number 1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.